Welcome to the Vintage GMC Motorhome Show podcast. Today we're exploring the pros and cons of replacing the factory engine fuel delivery system with an EFI replacement from FiTech.
It is quite the undertaking.
Oh, for sure. Picture this. You are cruising down the interstate at 65 miles per hour in your beautiful classic coach.
Just living the dream.
Right. The road is clear. You are making great time, and then suddenly the engine violently bucks.
Yeah, that is terrifying.
Your FiTech handheld display is just screaming that the engine is starving for fuel, the RPMs are swinging wildly, and you are basically about to be stranded on the shoulder.
Not exactly the relaxing weekend trip you planned.
Definitely not. And it begs the question, how does a 21st century controller get so completely confused by a 1970s engine block?
Well, that's exactly what we're going to get into.
Exactly. So for you listening right now, the mission of this deep dive is to take a massive stack of technical manuals, wiring schematics, and actual owner troubleshooting logs, and unpack exactly what it takes to modernize your classic coach.
Without getting stuck on the side of the road, hopefully.
Yeah, that's the goal. So we're going to enthusiastically preview this whole journey from, the historical reasons owners are even making this switch to the literal nuts and bolts of the installation.
And we really need to diagnose those terrifying real-world highway symptoms that constantly catch DIY mechanics off guard.
Because it is a massive undertaking.
Oh, absolutely. Taking a vintage platform and introducing modern fuel delivery, it isn't just a simple parts swap.
No, it's a collision of two entirely different eras of automotive engineering.
Exactly. You're taking a system designed around analog, mechanical vacuum, and you're bolting on digital sensors and high-pressure pumps.
So before you go tearing out parts from the engine bay, which is sitting right there between your front seats, by the way, you really need to understand the history of the engine you are dealing with.
Right, because you can't just throw modern parts at a vintage block without respecting its history.
And why the factory setup was designed the way it was in the first place. So, those famous long lines at gas stations, soaring inflation. And then, just as the industry was kind of catching its breath, the 1979 Iranian Revolution caused even further disruptions.
Detroit was suddenly scrambling to adapt to a world where fuel efficiency and emissions mattered far more than raw displacement.
Which directly influences what owners are dealing with today. Because those original mechanical carburetors, they were engineering marvels for their era.
They really were. They relied on the Venturi effect. As air rushed through the narrow throat of the carburetor, it created a pressure drop that literally sucked fuel out of the fuel bowl and into the engine.
But, and this is the kicker, they were engineered for the chemical fuel formulations of the 1970s.
Which is completely different from what we pump today.
Exactly. The ethanol blends we get at the gas station today, they absorb moisture from the air. So they are highly corrosive to the vintage metal alloys and rubber gaskets inside those old carburetors.
Which perfectly explains why the FiTech 3003 EFI system is so appealing to 455 owners today.
Because you get away from the ethanol corrosion.
Right. Plus, you gain self-tuning maps, OEM-level drivability, and a wideband O2 sensor that continuously adjusts the air-to-fuel ratio.
Yeah, you can drive from sea level in California straight up into the Rockies, and the system just adapts to the altitude automatically, which is incredible.
It's a game changer.
Now, real quick, for you listeners driving later coaches with the Olds 403 engine, there are other EFI kits available on the market tailored specifically for your setup.
Yeah, that's a whole different animal.
It is, and we are actually going to make that the topic of a future deep dive. But for today, focusing on the FiTech and the 455, here is the framing question. Is bolting 21st century technology onto a 1970s engine block really as seamless as the shiny brochures claim?
The brochure definitely paints a picture of a relaxing weekend project.
Right? Pop it on, have a beer.
Exactly. But the physical reality of the installation process requires incredible precision. The mechanical tolerances we are dealing with are completely unforgiving compared to, the sloppy, heavy iron of the 1970s.
So let's look at the basic swap. You pull off the original carburetor, you obsessively clean the gasket surface on the intake manifold, and you bolt the new FiTech throttle body down.
And the manual is very strict here. The linkage must be on the driver's side, and you have to torque those bolts to exactly 16 pound-feet.
Wait, I was reading the schematics, and there's a huge structural mismatch here. The 455 often uses a spread bore 4-barrel manifold.
Yes.
If I'm visualizing this correctly, A spread bore has two small holes in the front for cruising and two massive gaping holes in the back for heavy acceleration.
That's right.
But the FiTech unit is a square bore, meaning all four holes are exactly the same size. So how does that work?
Well, you've hit on a major installation trap right there. The footprints don't match.
Yeah, obviously.
So if you try to bolt a square bore EFI unit directly onto a spread bore manifold, you will have gaps where the metal simply doesn't overlap.
Oh, wow. So you just have open air.
Basically, you absolutely must use an adapter plate. It's inexpensive, but it acts as a bridge, funneling the square bore output into the spread bore manifold.
Because if you skip it, the throttle body might feel bolted down tightly, but you will create a massive vacuum leak at the base.
And a vacuum leak destroys the entire system because the FiTech controller relies heavily on reading manifold absolute pressure.
The MAP sensor.
Right, MAP.
Yeah.
That sensor measures the vacuum inside the engine to figure out how hard the engine is working. If outside air is just sucking in through a gap at the base...
The computer thinks you have your foot to the floor.
Exactly. So it dumps massive amounts of fuel into the engine when you're literally just idling.
That sounds messy. And speaking of messy, the plumbing requires that same level of scrutiny. You can't just reuse the rubber fuel hose you've had in the coach for 10 years.
No, absolutely not. Standard vintage rubber fuel hose is designed for the low pressure of a mechanical engine-driven fuel pump. We're talking maybe 6 or 7 psi max.
But modern EFI systems operate at high pressure.
Very high. You have to upgrade every single inch of rubber line to high-pressure J30R9 rated fuel hose.
Because standard hose will literally balloon and rupture under the 58 psi generated by the new electric pump.
Yeah, and spraying high-pressure fuel all over a hot engine block is a recipe for disaster.
A literal fire hazard. Okay, I want to focus on the wideband O2 sensor for a minute. Because the manual has a stern warning in bold print.
It does.
It requires a minimum 10-degree angle installation so
Yeah.
condensation doesn't pool inside it. And the exhaust must be absolutely 100% leak-free.
That is critical.
I kept thinking about this, and it's like trying to tune a guitar in a noisy wind tunnel.
Oh, I like that.
Right. If there's a crack or a leak in the exhaust pipe anywhere near that sensor, it isn't just reading the engine's combustion. It's reading the fresh outside air rushing into the exhaust pipe between the exhaust pulses.
That analogy is spot on. The O2 sensor is the sole window the FiTech controller has into how the engine is actually running.
It's blind otherwise.
Right. So when ambient oxygen gets pulled into a cracked exhaust manifold, the sensor reads that extra oxygen and tells the controller, hey, we are running dangerously lean, add more fuel immediately.
But the engine isn't actually lean. It's a false lean reading caused by the cracked pipe.
Exactly. But the controller doesn't know that. It just does what it's told, dumping excess fuel into the cylinders.
And that raw gas washes the lubricating oil off the cylinder walls, right? It fouls the spark plugs, creates terrible, rich misfires.
And it gets worse.
Oh, boy.
If the system gets confused by erratic readings and pulls fuel when the engine is under heavy load, it can create a genuine lean condition.
Which leads to detonation.
Yes, where the fuel-air mixture violently explodes in the cylinder rather than burning smoothly. Detonation will literally melt the tops off your pistons.
Yikes.
And engine damage from an exhaust leak is definitely not covered under warranty.
No, definitely not. So attention to detail is absolutely paramount. But here is something fascinating I found in the owner logs.
What's that?
People complete the installation perfectly. The exhaust is sealed, the bolts are torqued, the lines are rated for high pressure. But they notice something strange after the swap. The physical FiTech throttle body gets incredibly hot.
Ah, yes.
Much hotter than the old carburetor ever did. Why would a piece of aluminum sitting in the exact same spot suddenly retain so much more heat?
Well, it comes back to the physics of how the two different devices deliver fuel. The original carburetor relied on the Venturi effect we talked about earlier.
Right.
As it pulled liquid fuel into the airstream, that fuel atomized and evaporated aggressively as it traveled down through the carburetor body.
And evaporation absorbs heat.
Exactly. It's the same reason sweating cools your skin. That massive evaporation process created a significant chilling effect, constantly cooling the metal body of a carburetor. In fact, carburetors can sometimes get so cold they form ice on the outside.
Oh, wow, ice. But the EFI throttle body doesn't work like that. It has injectors that spray fuel under high pressure below the throttle plates.
Right. It isn't relying on a Venturi pressure drop to pull the fuel, so it doesn't get that massive, sudden evaporative cooling effect through the whole metal housing.
So without that evaporative cooling, the aluminum throttle body just acts like a giant heat sink.
Yes. absorbing all the radiant heat coming up from the scorching hot engine block and the intake manifold.
And the heat can get so intense that it starts to boil the fuel sitting inside the fuel rails of the throttle body before it even gets injected.
Which is a huge problem.
So to overcome this, owners need to create a thermal barrier. You slide a thick phenolic spacer between the intake manifold and the EFI throttle body.
Phenolic material doesn't conduct heat like aluminum does.
Right. So it physically insulates the throttle body from the hot engine block, keeping the fuel rails cool.
It is a brilliant, simple fix for a very complex thermodynamic problem.
Okay, so you have your spacer installed, everything is bolted down, and you finally take the motorhome out on the highway.
Here we go.
This is where those troubleshooting logs get scary. You are cruising smoothly, and suddenly the motorhome starts violently lurching at 65 miles per hour.
Or dreaded lurch.
You glance at your handheld display, and the RPMs are jumping wildly from 2,000 to 8,000, and the air-fuel ratio has spiked to 20.
Which means it is extremely lean.
Right, so seeing those three symptoms simultaneously, violent lurching, erratic RPMs, and an AFR of 20, what is going on there?
That points almost exclusively to electromagnetic interference, EMI.
Okay.
In these vintage GMCs, the usual culprit is the HEI distributor. That is the distributor with the ignition coil integrated right into the top under the red cap.
Oh, right, the red cap.
Yeah. HEI systems step 12 volts up to 40,000 volts to fire the spark plugs. And doing so generates a massive invisible magnetic field around the distributor.
And the FiTech system needs a clean RPM signal to know when to fire the injectors, right?
Exactly. And owners usually pull that signal wire directly from the tachometer terminal on that HEI distributor.
So if they route that delicate low-voltage signal wire too close to the spark plug wires, or drape it over the distributor cap.
That 40,000 volt magnetic field acts like a radio transmitter. It induces stray voltage directly into the attach wire. The controller is suddenly blinded by intense electrical noise.
So the controller panics. It thinks the engine is revving to 8,000 RPMs in a fraction of a second.
Yeah. And as a built-in safety measure to prevent the engine from destroying itself, the controller instantly shuts off the fuel injectors.
And because the injectors shut off, but your foot is still on the gas pedal, holding the throttle plates wide open.
The engine is just pumping raw, unburnt air straight through the block and into the exhaust.
So the O2 sensor reads all that raw air, the gauge spikes to 20, and the engine violently bucks as it rapidly dies, catches, and dies again.
It's violent. But the fix is just taking the time to route that attached signal wire as far away from the high-voltage ignition components as physically possible.
Don't just physically move it. But wait, let me push back a little here. What if the owner is proactive? They shield the wire perfectly. In fact, during the EFI swap, they install a brand new HEI distributor module to ensure the ignition is totally fresh.
Okay.
They head out on the highway, and 10 minutes later, the engine just dies. Same symptoms. What then?
Oh, that is a hidden trap in the vintage ignition ecosystem that creates the exact same highway shutdown. And it has nothing to do with the wires.
Really?
Yeah, I know exactly what they did wrong because it's a mistake anyone who has changed a spark plug might make.
Okay, tell me.
When you buy a new HEI module, it comes with a little packet of grease. Most people assume it's dielectric grease, you know, the clear stuff you put inside spark plug boots to keep moisture out.
Right, dielectric grease is an electrical insulator.
Exactly. But the HEI module generates an extreme amount of heat and relies entirely on the metal body of the distributor to act as a heat sink.
Oh, I see where this is going.
You cannot use dielectric grease under an HEI module. Because it is an electrical insulator, it also acts as a thermal insulator.
It traps the heat inside the electronics.
Yes. You must use a very specific thermal heat sink compound. The same white paste you use when building a computer processor.
Okay, so if you install the module dry, or use the clear dielectric grease.
That brand new module cannot shed its heat into the distributor body. It will overheat and completely cook itself, shutting down the engine in exactly 10 minutes at highway speeds.
Wow. So it masquerades as an EFI failure, but it is purely an ignition failure caused by using the wrong paste.
Exactly.
That is wild. Okay, so fixing the electronics is great, but a perfectly functioning controller doesn't matter if there's no actual gasoline reaching the engine.
Very true.
Let's look at the physical plumbing, because the second massive symptom owners report is losing all power on a gentle interstate hill.
Yeah, the hill climb struggle.
Right. The electrical gremlins are gone, but the motorhome drops down to 35 miles per hour, struggling to climb a grade that a 455 V8 should conquer effortlessly.
This points to a fundamental misunderstanding of fluid dynamics and how modern electric fuel pumps operate.
Okay, explain that.
The FiTech kit utilizes an inline, frame-mounted electric roller vane fuel pump. These pumps are incredibly efficient at pushing fuel under high pressure, getting that 58 psi all the way up to the throttle body.
But they are notoriously terrible at pulling or suctioning fuel out of the gas tank,
Yes, they're pushers, not pullers.
which leads to the most common logical installation error we see in the sources. Owners look at the two fuel filters provided in the kit. There's a coarse 100-micron filter and an ultrafine 10-micron filter.
Right, and they think they want the cleanest fuel possible hitting the brand new pump.
Naturally. So they install the microscopic 10-micron filter before the pump and the coarse filter after.
Which is a huge mistake. They're essentially forcing the pump to suck heavy liquid fuel through a microscopic barrier. It is like trying to drink a thick milkshake through a tiny coffee stirrer.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. The pump has to work so incredibly hard to pull fuel through that severe restriction that it creates a massive pressure drop on the suction side of the line.
And this is where the physics gets interesting. Most people think gasoline only boils when it gets extremely hot.
Right.
But physics tells us that if you drop the pressure of a fluid severely enough, its boiling point drops with it.
Exactly. The pump is pulling so hard against that filter restriction that the liquid gasoline physically boiled into vapor bubbles right inside the fuel line, even at ambient temperatures.
That is called pump cavitation.
Yes. The pump ends up spinning wildly in vapor instead of grabbing liquid. Vapor doesn't cool or lubricate the pump internals.
So the unit rapidly overheats and loses all ability to push fuel forward?
Yep. When you hit a gentle hill and demand more fuel for the climb, the cavitating pump just gives up and the motorhome falls on its face.
So the fix is simply swapping the physical locations of those two filters.
That's it. You put the coarse 100-micron pre-filter between the tank and the pump. It catches the big rust flakes and debris without restricting the suction.
Then you place the ultrafine 10-micron post filter between the pump and the engine.
Right, because the pump has absolutely no problem pushing fuel under 58 psi through that tight restriction to protect the throttle body.
But this brings up a very practical DIY question.
Okay, let's hear it.
Let's say I'm an owner, I'm under the coach swapping the filters, and I accidentally drop and crush that 10-micron EFI filter.
Oops.
Yeah. Can't I just run to my garage and grab a standard 40-micron carburetor fuel filter I already have sitting on the shelf?
I highly advise against doing that. EFI systems and traditional carbureted systems have drastically different mechanical tolerances. The fuel injectors inside the FiTech throttle body rely on a tiny internal needle valve called a pintle. That pintle rapidly opens and closes microscopic orifices to spray the fuel.
So the tolerances are exponentially tighter than a brass carburetor jet.
Yes. A 40-micron filter is far too coarse. It will allow larger debris to flow straight to the engine. If a particle that size gets past the filter, it can lodge inside the injector and jam the internal pintle wide open.
Oh man, so if the pintle is jammed open, the injector can never close.
Exactly. It will constantly dump raw, unmetered fuel straight into the intake manifold at 58 psi, completely flooding the engine. You absolutely must wait and get the correct 10-micron filter.
Do not cut corners. Okay, so your 10-micron filter is on the pressure side, your 100-micron filter is on the suction side, your attach wires are shielded, your HEI module has thermal paste, and your exhaust is totally sealed.
Sounds perfect.
You have rebuilt the entire fuel and electrical ecosystem. But there is one more ghost in the machine that can shut the motorhome down, and it traces all the way back to the rear fuel tanks.
Oh yes, this is a brilliant example of how modernizing one component creates a cascading failure in systems you wouldn't even think about.
Let's talk about the venting.
Right. From the factory, the 1973 GMC Motorhome did not have a vented gas cap. The cap was completely sealed.
Which sounds incredibly dangerous, a sealed tank expanding in the heat.
It would be, except the factory setup utilized a specialized evaporation control system, or ECS.
Okay, what is that?
This included a liquid vapor separator and carbon canisters mounted up front. All the fuel vapors that would normally expand and need venting were directed into these carbon canisters, which absorbed and stored them.
Got it.
When the engine was running, manifold vacuum from the original carburetor would actively draw those trapped vapors into the engine to be burned. Because the system was constantly purging vapors, the original gas cap could be completely sealed.
But when owners install the EFI system, they want to clean up the engine bay. They see these old, disconnected hoses and bulky carbon canisters, and they remove or bypass the ECS system entirely.
Right. And if you remove the ECS system and keep the factory sealed gas cap, your fuel tank has absolutely no way to breathe.
So as that new, powerful electric pump draws gallons of gasoline out of the tank to feed your highway speeds, it leaves a physical void in the tank.
Yes. If ambient air can't get in to replace the volume of fuel that is leaving, it pulls a massive vacuum inside the steel tank.
The pump is basically trying to suck a golf ball through a garden hose.
Exactly. Eventually, that vacuum becomes stronger than the suction power of the fuel pump. The pump simply cannot pull any more fuel against the vacuum, the engine starves, and the motorhome shuts down.
And the easiest fix is just walking into an auto parts store and buying a $20 standard vented gas cap.
That's really it. It allows air to enter the tank as fuel is drawn out, equalizing the pressure completely.
It is amazing how a simple vented cap solves a massive drivability issue.
Speaking of simple fixes, there is one more critical check owners must do while they're under the coach.
What's that?
Grounding. You have to ensure that a heavy gauge cable, like a 2-gauge or 0-gauge wire, runs directly from the 455 engine block all the way to the main starter battery negative terminal.
Wait, you can't just ground it to the steel frame like they did in the 70s?
Absolutely not. Steel frames rust over 50 years. Bolts corrode. And every bit of rust creates electrical resistance.
And the FiTech controller operates on millivolts of sensor data, right?
Yes. If it doesn't have a perfect zero-resistance ground directly to the battery, it will suffer from voltage drops and internal electrical noise, bringing back all those erratic RPMs and lurching issues we talked about.
So if we synthesize the main lesson here from all these manuals and logs, modernizing your fuel delivery is incredibly rewarding.
It really is.
You get reliable starts, altitude compensation, a cleaner running engine, but it requires respecting the vintage ecosystem of the motorhome.
You can't just bolt on 21st century tech and ignore the 1970s physics happening underneath it.
Definitely not. Now, if you are doing this swap and need visual aids, there are fantastic resources out there. Specifically, check out FiTech's YouTube channel, their website FAQ, and their tech center, which is loaded with visual guides for calibration and tuning.
Highly recommend those. And before we go, I want you listening to really ponder a broader implication of this swap.
Let's hear it.
We talked about how the original 1973 setup relied heavily on the specific manifold vacuum profile of the carburetor.
Right.
That engine vacuum was basically the mechanical nervous system for all the accessories. It operated everything from the evaporation control system we just discussed to the spark advance via the thermal vacuum switch.
Right. So when you remove that carburetor and drastically change how fuel and air flow into the manifold, how might that fundamentally alter the delicate vacuum balance of all those aging accessory systems?
Exactly. The fuel delivery is modernized and fixed, but what happens to the rest of the coach's mechanical nervous system?
That is a fascinating thought to mull over next time you pop the hood. And speaking of exploring different technologies, we're going to sign off by reminding you that our very next deep dive will take a look at another brand of EFI system upgrade for these classic coaches, the Holley Sniper EFI system.
Sure, you're fine.
We will compare how their engineers tackle these exact same vintage challenges. Thanks for joining us.